So, some new things in Balance and Feedback, a channel which doesn't have everything that's going to make it into the game. It's just a poll, just an idea. Just because an idea was popular doesn't mean it will make it to the game as a final product. But firstly, I want to talk about the Gatling gun buff. So, the Gatling gun did actually get a buff in the recent update for the Hacker Tower. Now, when polled, there were three options for the Gatling gun buff. You were Pierce oriented, so less max DPS, so when you're hitting only one enemy, it's less maximum DPS. Higher DPS with low Pierce, so more max DPS, and a hybrid, which is a current Gatling gun, because the current Gatling gun can hit 3 enemies and deal a decent amount of damage, whereas this version would have a high amount of damage but less Pierce, and then this would be Pierce oriented, so you can hit up to like 6 enemies but less damage per enemy. So what this clarifies is, before this vote gets too crazy, I would like to clarify that option 3 will never have 1000 DPS, because 1k DPS with 2.5 Pierce is absolutely insane. I think the Gatling gun currently has 2.5 Pierce. Apparently, I have been told 2.5 Pierce. The 0.5 of a Pierce means that the third enemy that's hit, because 2 enemies are hit with full damage, but the third enemy is hit but with half damage. This isn't unique to the Gatling gun, I don't believe. The shotgunner also has 2.5 Pierce, so it hits the first 2 enemies with full damage, and then the third enemy with half damage. Anyways, option A, 5 Pierce with around 400-ish DPS, so a maximum of about 2000 DPS if you consider all enemies hit in FPS mode. I'm assuming this is also FPS mode, because the regular Gatling gun doesn't have Pierce when you don't do it in FPS mode. B would have 1050 DPS with like 1.5 Pierce, so that's one enemy hit maximum, and then half an enemy. That means that they'll be dealt half damage. So you're only looking at a potential of about 1600 DPS, whereas this one you're looking at 2000 DPS, and then option C would be a minor buff to the current version of the Gatling gun. However, these numbers are arbitrary, they're not final, and I'd expect if there were to be a final version of the Gatling gun, then these stats would be slightly different. Except, we kind of did get one of those options, and it wasn't the most popular option, nor was it the least popular option. It was actually option C, which is a hybrid, which is the current Gatling gun, where the current Gatling gun was actually slightly buffed. So the maximum DPS at level 6 went from 694.44 to a 787.04, cost efficiency going from 329.04 to 270.95. But there's no changes to the Pierce, and really it's only a slight damage increase going from 75 to 85. So we did get option 3, which is kind of interesting. They did clarify this later, saying an actual Gatling gun buff would be coming soon. The current buff stats are kind of a placeholder, and we're just meant to boost the tower a bit. So the final version of the Gatling gun is still coming, and the version that we got still goes on the hybrid version that we saw previously, just slightly buffed. Which kind of goes to show that the Gatling gun isn't the final product yet, and we should expect more from the Gatling gun. Probably due with the high DPS and low Pierce version, because that got like the majority of the vote, even though there were 3 options. Now, I've seen a lot of people complain the fact that they don't actually like this change, because the maximum potential of the DPS for the Gatling gun would be nerfed. So currently it is about 2100-ish, assuming that you hit 3 enemies. Whereas for this version here, for B, it looks like it'll be about 1600, which many people, surprisingly, do not like. People said, well, if you compare it to option A with like 2000 DPS, that's clearly a nerf. Well, yes, that is a nerf, considering the fact that you hit multiple enemies. The only problem is, many people don't really mind too much, it doesn't seem like, not hitting a load of enemies so long that the Gatling gun has a load of DPS. So that's why a lot of people have gone for option B, even though the headline statistic is the fact that, well, its Pierce isn't as high as option A. It does have more DPS, like nearly double the DPS, over double the DPS, at least mentioned here. Now, as for the new Fallen mode, there was a poll recently for it, so some people said it's better than before, or as good as before, and worse than before. There was nearly the majority of people saying that it was worse than before. They got the plurality of the vote, 49%, so about half the people in the game think that Fallen mode is worse than it was before. Personally, I think it's slightly worse, given the fact that I think the previous Fallen mode was actually perfectly balanced. Yes, there was a power creep, which meant that Fallen mode was slightly easier than expected. However, you could have easily just adjusted like some enemy healths, or like added a couple more enemies in some waves. Like, the developers have statistics on when people lose the game. They could just buff the waves where people weren't losing as much. Yeah, and I think the current issue is that it's really unbalanced. Like, some waves are incredibly difficult in Fallen mode. Like, there's a wave with like a nimble Fallen tank or whatever, which goes through the map super fast, which if you don't have the electroshocker, you're kind of screwed. And I think even if you have the electroshocker, because it has no stun, does it have stun? I don't know. But In any case, that's really unbalanced. Here, there's another poll for top or bottom path hacker for solo and then for multiplayer, which, to be fair, I actually kind of do see. So in solo mode, many people prefer the DPS of the hacker tower, while also having the ability to clone towers, whereas for multiplayer, that's less of a concern, given the fact that there's probably a load of other towers. But cloning towers with high DPS means that the bottom path is more favourable. So I think the testers actually got the hacker tower correct. Let's not talk about the amount of bugs that it has, but the hacker tower does have multiple utility depending on solo play or multiplayer. And then we get to the main discussion. So initially, the hacker update was meant to be a lot bigger and include a lot more rebalances. Some of these didn't quite make it in, but may be revisited in the near future. So firstly, the engineer buff. Yes, the engineer buff was meant to be coming in the hacker update. However, they heavily tested it, but didn't feel as if the product we had by the update day would have been satisfying to use, so it was pushed back. There was a poll recently saying regarding the method of containment, which of these DPS towers feel the most underwhelming. Majority of people said Accelerator. The Accelerator was buffed in this update, despite some people initially saying it was nerfed. Like, people flip their minds out over the smallest things and then just change their minds instantly. Like, Night 1 in Solar Eclipse went from, like, the hardest shit ever to the easiest shit ever once people realized, oh, wait, you can spam Scout and not need the Accelerator. Yeah, people rely on the Accelerator too much back then. But the next tower along was the engineer, so actually it will kind of make sense why the engineer would be second in the list. I mean, to be fair, compared to the accelerator, the engineer got like less than a quarter of the votes. But then you get the pursuit, the ranger, and the turret. The turret did get a slight amount of votes, but the pursuit and the ranger, there's no way that they changed that. I mean, they barely got any votes, and I think the pursuit and the rangers are perfectly balanced as they are. So the next one probably would be the turret, but I think people want the engineer more. However, that being said, they didn't mention any statistical changes for the engineer, so it could be more DPS, it could be more turrets. We'll have to see on that. Next, they also mention brawl adjustments. I already talked about the Gatling gun buff. Brawl adjustments, I'm not entirely sure what that means. I don't know if that means a nerf or it probably means a rebalance actually of the brawler, because currently right now it is a very, very good early game tower, but later on I think it kind of drops off a bit. So I think there'll be some adjustments to that. Rocketeer changes. Interesting, because I think the Rocketeer is fine up until level 3. Level 4 is where things get a bit iffy. Well, that being said though, given the fact that the Mortar was nerfed in this update, I think the Rocketeer does have an opportunity to be slightly better than the Mortar in certain circumstances. And finally, Shotgunner buff. Like back in the day, the Shotgunner, and to be fair, the Shotgunner still is a okay-ish tower to use in certain circumstances. However, with the power creep of other towers in the game, yeah, the Shotgunner has fell behind a little bit. And just to clarify here, nothing here is confirmed to release anytime soon, just give an update since I can, to see why some people may be wondering where the pole tower rebalances went. To be fair though, there's no mentions of any other golden towers. I know the golden cowboy was rebalanced in this update, but there were other polls saying that the golden scout should change, the golden soldier and the golden pyromancer, yet they've not been touched yet. So I wonder where they will go. And then there were some recent polls about the shotgunner. Have you used the shotgunner recently for any of the harder game modes, Fallen Plus? 5% of people said yes, 95% no. Wow, okay. If you answered no to the previous answer, so that's like, what, a lot of people, please select all grievances that apply. Inconsistencies early game, cannot one-shot abnormals, too micro-intensive with little reward, not enough versatility, bad late game, abused by debuffs, outclassed by other short-range towers, brawler, etc. They also mentioned it's been a long time since concept sets have been posted in this chat, so I thought a shotgunner buff I've made in my free time would be fun based on the poll results so far. Here's the results. So there's been a slight decrease in cost for level 2 and level 4. The shot size, so that's the spread. So that's the amount of pellets that the shotgunner actually shoots out, not the maximum damage that it shoots out. It has increased to 8, whereas previously it was 6. The cooldown, so that's the fire rate, has changed from 2 seconds to 0.5 seconds. And then some DPS changes overall because of the shot size increasing. Cooldown changes balance that out kinda, but then later on it does get more utility because of these changes. The cost efficiency is going like this, so it looks better than before, and the net cost overall has decreased slightly, especially for level 2 and level 3. Although, interestingly here, I think they're using the table, or the wiki table, that Gabon uses, or Gabon, I don't know how to say their name. Yeah, so in case you didn't know, there's a website called tdseditor.com, and for some reason, this has become popular. I don't know how. It still is an unofficial creation and not the official product of Paradoxum Games. But yes, that's very cool that even the testers are now using this statistic editor that was made by a community member. That's very cool. Also mentioned here is that the placement box has been reduced from 1 to 0.5, so half the size that it currently is, which is the standard, I think, for some melee towers. So that's the Gladiator, that's the Slasher, and that's the Brawler. And also, there is a mention of debuff/stun immunity at max level. Again, very interesting, given the fact that the only towers that have like these debuff/stun immunity include stuff like the Gladiator, but that's temporary, the Warden, which is also temporary, and the Brawler, but that's permanent. I wonder if the Shotgunner would get a permanent stun immunity/debuff immunity like the Brawler tower does. Although that's being said, the debuff immunity I've not really seen for any other tower in Tower Defense Simulator apart from the glitch tower. So maybe this will be the first tower with debuff immunity, purposeful debuff immunity. We'll have to see.